Whenever it comes to video game franchises, none other is my favorite of all time, being Sonic the Hedgehog, and there are a great deal of reasons why. Whether it be the characters, the story, the world building, the gameplay, everything in there is just the perfect recipe for what I love in video games. And I gotta tell you, it certainly isn't perfect. This franchise has seen time and time again so many failures and absolute dumpster fires. Like, honestly, if I'm gonna be real here, it is a miracle that this series has survived for so long. The fact that the character himself, Sonic himself, represents 90s radical coolness, like edgy, 90s attitude, and the fact that he has gone like 30 plus years in stride with this, it is honestly outstanding to me. And for how much I love this franchise, what I like to do is I would like to cover each and every Sonic game there is. Now, I do remember I made a video like a half a year ago on Sonic and the Secret Rings, but that was just more so because I just played that game and it made me like angry about it. But for this, I want to cover this on a game-by-game basis, going by each game as of release. I might, go here and there with some games, but for the most part, I want to stay on a strict timeline here. And to do that, we're going to have to look at the very first Sonic game, Sonic 1 on the Sega Genesis. Now, to give context for this game, I just want to tell you this. I'm going to give you my personal backstory for this game and the overall making of this game. It was actually one of the first ever platformers I actually ever played completely, because on the App Store they had the classic Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic CD, and that's how I found those games. And I fell in love with it just automatically. The sprites, the characters, the colors, all of it was outstanding to me. And what's funny is I've played this game multiple times, I gotta tell you. Now, with that out of the way, let me get into the history of this game. I know you probably know it, but just to cover it because it's very essential to the character himself, we just gotta do it. Because back during the 80s, the video game crash of 1983, Nintendo basically took over the market in over 2 years with the SNES. And Mario became a household name with that. They were on top of the world. And while you had Mario making cash out of his ass, you had Sega with the Master System. And I'm not gonna lie, it looks pretty bad. And their mascot was Alex Kidd. You're probably thinking to yourself, who the hell is Alex Kidd? I don't even know who he is. And basically what Sega did was they needed to have a new mascot, so they held a worldwide design competition to find a new design for their character. One notable one was a rabbit, which was an early concept for Sonic himself, along with another early concept, which would be eventually turned into Dr. Eggman. But eventually it was settled into a hedgehog, and due to the game's mechanics of rolling into a ball, that was created into Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, with Sonic, he had a lot of inspirations from. The inspirations are not all but included Santa Claus, Michael Jackson, and the attitude of Bill Clinton. If that's not 90s, I don't know what is. And the color of Sonic, the logo of Sega itself, pure blue. With the making of the game, there were a bunch of scrapped elements, such as a rock band and an early concept of Vector the Crocodile. And originally, Sonic was supposed to have a human girlfriend, IGN comment 349 here. And then this is where the funny thing comes in, because whenever Sega was introducing this to America, they basically had a quote-unquote American version of Sonic, to where the box art itself had a more radical, edgy version of him, where it looks like he has a mohawk. Basically, they just did kind of whatever they could to appeal to American audiences. And to be fair, it worked, because releasing on June 23rd, 1991, marketing was in full force and basically created today the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo war, and headlining it was Sonic the Hedgehog. And this is where he truly adapted his speed and attitude as the game itself, because with this you could truly tell that Sonic was Sega's answer to Mario. The attitude, the edge, just the fact that he was way more quote-unquote cooler than Mario. It was basically embedded into the character that he was better than the competition. Sonic 1 is basically your standard platformer. You go through 6 different types of zones with all separate acts, and at the end of the final act of each and every zone, you fight against the evil Dr. Eggman, or, because it gets so confusing, for Western audiences, known as Dr. Ivo Robotnik, because it was supposed to be more like evil sounding, or just more like menacing, I guess. And I mean, like, you look at Eggman, and he doesn't even look menacing. He just looks like a jolly old man. In terms of Sonic, though, this game has what I would consider great physics and gameplay, especially for its time, because there's a reason why Green Hill is so beloved and so admittedly overdone, is because it basically introduces you and makes you like in love with the gameplay. It feels so like organic, and just building up speed in general is just so like, it feels so good to do, honestly. It feels like so rewarding to do, honestly, because this is basically like, I think Sonic 1, what it does best is that it teaches you how to play the game and basically how to do it better, because throughout each and every playthrough, there's like different like routes you could take. If you take the higher route, you could get all the rewards, faster time, but if you don't, you get punished with a longer, more like agonizing time with spikes, enemies, and all that sort of stuff. And speaking of Green Hill, I think the thing that it really does well, that the whole series does throughout its entire lifetime, even to this day, are set pieces. I know it may seem simple by today's standards, but that loop-de-loop and like the tunnel that you go through in the first Sonic game is what I call a set piece. Along with his other controls, his iconic ball form is what you use to destroy most enemies. And in terms of it, it really works. And I think something that doesn't ruin the first Sonic game, but honestly makes it a little bit easier and a little bit like less engaging to go back into, is the use of the spin dash. I'm gonna get into that for Sonic 2, but essentially what you do is you roll into a ball, you spin up like a lot of times, and you just like zoom everywhere. And the reason why it kind of hurts for Sonic 1's case is because you basically use the level itself to gain speed, but in later games, you just, speed up and you just go. And so for this game, it seems a little bit archaic, and that's what I think the real appeal for Sonic is at times, is the fact that you're able to replay it so many times due to the amount of speed that you have. The fact that you can like go as fast as you can but still get faster times due to your knowledge and like memorization of the layout of the level, it honestly makes it so engaging to always come back to, especially for Green Hill. And the reason why I'm mentioning Green Hill so much is because the rest of the levels, they're kind of bad. Like, I think one of the like really negative things about Sonic 1, like going back to Sonic 1, is outside of Green Hill, the rest of the levels are kind of, they're not bad, but they really aren't anything special, especially compared to the later classic games. Which makes sense, because whenever I did research for this, it turns out that they put all their eggs into Green Hill. They put all of their development time to make sure it was the perfect introduction into this series. And honestly, it makes sense, because if you look at the marketing at that time, they really only used Green Hill as that like, whoa, look, this is better than Mario, which makes sense, but like, just, but even though the levels aren't like that, like good outside of Green Hill, they do have stuff that help you, get along the way. They have a bunch of springs, loop-de-loops, ramps that help you add to gaining speed. In terms of power-ups, they aren't like Mario to where like they're fully in his arsenal. He has like very little, because in terms of power, well, I guess ironically you could say he is the power, because the only power-ups he has is invincibility and a shield, and that basically is all you need to get the job done. And in terms of keeping yourself alive, all you need to do is just collect rings. You only need one. If you get 50 at the end of a stage, you go into special stages, which has a giant ring and brings you into, it's a nightmare. I don't know what else to say. Like, those stages are actual hell. They're not the worst in terms of special stages, but for the first Sonic game, I guess it's tolerable. Because in this game, you collect the Chaos Emeralds, which I'll talk about later in the story section, but it's very bad because it's just stupid bright color lights, and you just spin around. You barely get to move Sonic himself. It honestly is a chore to play. And honestly, outside of that with the special stages, the zones, like I said, vary in quality. Because as I mentioned again, Green Hell is an amazing level. It's a great introduction to the game, bright colors, great music, and it brings you into the world of the character himself. And like I said, it's always replayable. Like I said, it's always reused nowadays in later titles, but I think there's a reason why. It's a little bit too nostalgic. Honestly, it's not even nostalgic at this point. It's used every single game. I think it's a great reason why it's used because whenever you see this, you automatically see this as a part of Sonic's world. And along with this, with Eggman, it's a very simple but very amazing first impression. Because in terms of bosses in this game, outside of like the finale, it's just the Eggmobile, but with it just has an addition onto it. Like you have a wrecking ball in the first zone, which is, like I said, overplayed in general, but most of them are very simple if you just learn their attack patterns. So let's say you're playing Sonic 1, you just ran through Green Hill, you're having a great time, and then what do you run into next? Goddamn Marble Zone. And I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty ass. Like, imagine the type of impression you have on this. We go through this speed-filled stage to this slow-paced slog, and honestly, it's just so trash. It's just moving blocks, spikes everywhere. Like, it's honestly such a chore to go through. The next one we have is Spring Yard Zone, and honestly, it's pretty alright. There's a bunch of springs. I like the aesthetic. Pretty okay, but you know what, we always have, oh fuck. You know what, I know it, you know it, Labyrinth Zone is complete garbage, like legit dog water. This makes me fear the ocean. Like, I know people have ranted about this before, but water levels in video games, especially Sonic games, because of this game, are so god awful. Like, that music alone like scares me, like legit makes me fear. Like, dude, this level legit like makes me like think this game, like, do me mind you, I think this is a good first game for the franchise, but that level alone is garbage. There's a reason why people hate water levels. It's because of shit like this. But I will say this, I might be the only one here to admit this, but I do like the final boss of that zone because there's no like Eggman thing going on. Is he's just avoiding traps and like going through this like Indiana Jones style, avoiding, you know, like spikes and like arrows. I don't know, but I think it's kind of cool. And outside of that, that's really about it. The next one we have is Spring Yard Zone, and honestly, it's pretty alright. Nothing special, but honestly, after the horror show we just went through, I'll take it. There's a bunch of springs. I like the aesthetic. It's pretty okay, but I'm not gonna lie, we actually have a good zone on the next one. That one we have is Starlight Zone, and honestly, this is my second favorite one. This one is pretty cool. I like the theme, the music, everything here is pretty peak. And especially leading up to the second last level of the game, it's honestly a pretty good way to send it off before the finale. And then we have Scrap Brain Zone, and honestly, it's pretty whatever. I don't have that hard of a time on this one. I know it's supposed to be like a very like dark and scary place, but honestly, I've been through so many times, it's not even like that big of a deal for me, especially with later games that do the more threatening Eggman presence better. Then we have the final boss, and this is like the first showdown between these two with decades to come. And if you ask me what I think about it, it's pretty whatever. It's just tubes. It's just Eggman and tubes. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like this would be more intimidating if I didn't have the spin dash, because with it I could just easily avoid the tubes and the little like energy balls, so that kind of just like ruins it, I guess. That's basically about everything. The last thing we have is the story. Now, obviously, compared to what later games will become, this is fairly simple, but this basically does set up the standard for the series, because I would argue at the time, in terms of video games, this actually has a story, because at the time, most video games were just like saving the princess or just going on a generic classic adventure, but in this one, you actually have a little bit of something to it in this. Like, the fact alone that in this game you're fighting enemies and you're saving animals like trapped in robots, that's already like an interesting concept alone. But in terms of like the actual like meat on the bones, there's nothing much here. Basically, the premise is that Eggman travels to South Island in order to acquire the Chaos Emeralds, and just minding his own business, Sonic goes to stop him. That's really about it. It's just the classic Sonic versus Eggman story, nothing too crazy. And in terms of the Chaos Emeralds, there's only 6 in this game, not the usual 7. So after you save the day, you just go back to Green Hill and you just make flowers. Like that's it. That's all I get after doing all that BS. Okay. Overall, that's the first Sonic game. It's not perfect by any means, but honestly, it does have its charm sometimes. Overall, it was a really great debut for the Hedgehog and basically made himself a household name. And yeah, that's about it. See ya.